Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're chatting with Jonny Cantin, a freelance board game designer with a multitude of successful titles under his belt, such as A Fistful of Meeples, Merchant's Cove, Endless Winter, and many others. His most recent title, Solar Sphere, is currently on Kickstarter. Jonny, welcome to the binge. How you doing, man?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's awesome to have you. I tell you, there's only been a couple times where we've had people who are like exclusive game designers that just kind of create games for other people. So it's always a treat when we get somebody like that on our podcast. I know a lot of our listeners wanted to do like game design themselves or development themselves. So I'm sure there's going to be some nuggets here for some of our listeners. So just to kind of kick it off, how did you get into board game design? Like, it's such a weird thing to get into, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I was a hobbyist, like so many, just collecting games. And in about the mid 2000s, I got introduced to Euro games and like Carcassonne, that sort of thing. Got really excited about it and started a little collection. And living in kind of a rural community in California, I didn't have a lot of game nights like you do now, where you can just go meet up and find stuff. So I kind of just got known as the nerd herder, and I owned a little art gallery at the time, and I was inviting people over and introducing them to Euro games, or finding people who are also discovering these. So there's like this 5 years at least of just discovery, getting into that sort of thing. And being kind of a creative person, I like to do visual arts, music, things like that. Eventually somewhere I got kind of brave enough to make my own prototype and start from there, and it's just been kind of a slippery slope since then. So studying and learning and all that. I have a giant board game collection. I could probably steer it around here. So
Wow.
I kind of think of it as a library. I like to collect by designer a lot. So I'll even get like their lesser known ones besides their hits to kind of see how they evolved, to see if maybe I can follow some sort of evolution as well through my own work.
Oh, that's so cool. So is it fair to say you kind of like, and it's an interesting approach, right? So not only are you, into game design, but you're spending time researching kind of like the artists that have come before you, right? And kind of seeing their trajectory and how they evolved. And when you're doing that research, are you looking at like mechanics? Are you looking at how their themes evolve? What are some of the things you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting one might be, we could look back at like Ticket to Ride or something and hear about Alan Moon's, crazy adventures of importing games and failures and successes. And then this fantastic franchise is created and all that. And then to discover, like one of my favorite designer duos is Inca and Marcus Brand. They did like Village, they've done the Exit series and all that. Yeah. And their gateway game was like Ticket to Ride. And they got excited about that and wanted to make something that great. And now it's like, maybe I'm that next generation, I would hope, of the designer that's kind of like sees that lineage. They love Ticket to Ride. I love their Village and Murano and their other titles, and kind of see like maybe right now there's like a lot of synthesis of these ideas that have been done. There is deck building, there is worker placement. What about worker placement and deck building, right? And that's sort of emergent sort of level stuff. I don't know. I mean, there's probably going to be a brand new mechanic invented, next year. Who knows? But right now, it's very fascinating to see how these get kind of squished together in new ways.
Yeah, it is cool kind of seeing this. It's almost like evolution, right? Like you have the original, different mechanics that are kind of isolated. And then as they kind of cross-pollinate and, every game that's coming out now is a different combination and permutation of different mechanics, different play styles and so forth. And then wrapping those into different interesting themes. It's a cool time to be in the industry. It really is, to see kind of that evolution. And I think you're right. We will start seeing some new mechanics. And I think that starts off maybe with just seeing like a spin on a current mechanic. Is that fair? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of people cite like deck building as being like just out of the blue. But if you think about it, there's like collectible card games that people are effectively kind of deck building out there by buying piecemeal stuff. And, we take that and just go, well, what if you take the buying and make it in the game, that you actually acquire the cards through, game money instead of real money, and build it within this kind of context. And so even something like that has like definitely a sea change, I think, of games before and after Dominion, right? Yeah. No Dominion, no Arnak, that kind of thing. Then you go like no Stone Age, no Agricola, no Arnak, right? So you can't really arrive at Dune Imperium or any of these games without following that back. But I think there's things that sometimes with invention, like somebody might come up with something, but somebody else might popularize it. And that's common across invention in general. And I think it happens a little bit in game design. Like sometimes people say one of the Keyflower games had the first implementation of worker placement in it. But generally it's cited that Kalis is like the worker placement game. And then people think of Stone Age and Agricola as kind of like the primordial ones that they go to. And then a lot of people got introduced to it later by Lords of Waterdeep, something like that, where instead of having, the dry Euro theme, they brought in the adventurers and the D&D sort of stuff. And then that popularized it even more. And then you just have this next generation where worker placement just is almost a household word, in our cottage industry. So
is there a mechanic that you have yet to implement into one of your designs? Or are you trying everything right now?
There's a lot. You could look up BGG had kind of a list of mechanisms, mechanics, whichever you prefer.
Yeah.
But they're kind of strange because some of them were like not necessarily a mechanic. They're just kind of like a goal or something that happens in a game. Yeah. And then they kind of updated that with Isaac Shalev and Jeffrey Engelstein wrote the encyclopedia of game mechanisms, and they've adapted that entire catalog into the BGG database, and they've preserved the other ones, other little fringe ones in there as well. And so, being honest with yourself and looking at a book this thick and almost every 2 pages a complete different mechanic or a subsidiary one, it's like, I don't think it's honest to think that I could, in my lifetime, actually experiment with every single mechanic out there. But there's ones I definitely favor. And there's probably a few that, like player elimination, I'm not really in love with that, if that's a mechanism or a goal. Yeah. And so I probably won't have a game where players can effectively get kicked out by any means and not play the game. Memory is not something, I think it's great for kids games and stuff like that to teach them, spatial awareness and that sort of thing. I don't think I would rely on something that actually used the skill of memory in it. As a mechanism. So there's stuff like that I kind of avoid. I'm not opposed to like roll and move. I think there's fabulous roll and move games like Cedric Sebrichet's new game called Glow. And it's effectively a roll and move, but it's really clever, really beautiful. And I think even something that's kind of, gets a lot of hate because of, I don't know, Monopoly or old school stuff can be revitalized through, an emergent process of taking different stuff and adding it into the roll and move, dice selection, then roll and move. And it's like, hey, this is actually really fun.
That's great. And when you do your design or, for lack of a better word, even development of some of this stuff, like, are you doing the development side? Like, are you layering on themes and so forth? Or are you coming up with kind of almost like a whiteboard that somebody could wrap any theme onto? Like, what's your process look like in that regards?
So I kind of do 2 different things. So it's like I'm a freelance designer, and I'm also a freelance developer, and then sometimes end up doing kind of a hybrid of both. So if I'm designing just purely on spec, like just I'm going to make a game because I want to with these mechanics and this theme, I usually try to think of at this point 2 or 3 systems or mechanisms that I think go together in a way that creates something fun and novel. And then before I go like way down the rabbit hole, I like to think of a theme that makes sense. Like, why did these 3 things make sense? What theme could encompass this and not be like ludonarratively dissonant, as I might call it?
Yeah.
And then I'll let that theme kind of guide the rest of the design in a lot of ways. So if it ends up being like, I don't know, say a Western theme thing, you have to think of like the tropes. What do people expect of a Western game? They expect like, cowboy hats, horses, maybe robbing banks and shootouts, these sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And so that might be like, well, if there's a side mechanism or what's the goal over here, it might be like getting gold, right? It's not going to be, appeasing the king of the land to be the next heir. That doesn't make sense. So I let that kind of drive the design and I think of it as like thematically informed design. So it's kind of, the cart's in front of the horse sometimes and vice versa. As a developer, it's very often that I will walk into a game that's halfway done or more, and a theme that the publisher has settled on, maybe not the original theme that the designer wanted, but something that they've negotiated and come up with. And I might help with finishing the game in a lot of ways, editing it, and also integrating the new theme to the mechanisms that were there before. That can be difficult. I worked on one that went from being like a train stockyard game into becoming like a haunted house sort of thing, and just taking that, it was very, very hard to do. So
Yeah.
I almost feel like when I do a screening now, I need to really consider like, so what is the game now? And you really see a clear pathway how to adjust it to this other theme, because you want to bring it to the market that way, and see if it's just an impossible task or not, because sometimes it's very, very, very hard.
So in a case like that, when you have like a train yard game and it gets turned into like a haunted mansion type, like what's the thinking behind that? From a, like, obviously it wasn't you doing that, but what's the thinking behind changing so radically a theme like that? Was it there was a hook that they felt they had and thought, you know what, if we can get this one hook, it's gonna be much more marketable, so we'll sign that game, but we got to reskin it? Or like, what was the kind of thought
Well, I
process
think I think there's like a lot of saturation and expectation around train games, for instance. So
Yeah.
there's like if you like Ticket to Ride and some of these like train game, Euro games, things like that, cool. But then there's also this entire leg of like 18xx games and things like this that say, I don't even know if this particular publisher has just seen the breadth of those. They're long, big games with like a rich history and a lot of lineage. And so I think when you make a train game, you go into it and suddenly people are like, oh, is there stock holding? Like they come in with expectations, just like, I'm going to make a 4X game that has these 4 things, but there's a certain expectation about what that means in the mechanism. And if you step outside of that into a theme that doesn't have as many, say, restrictions or expectations, like you think of a haunted house game, you just go like, I don't know, I guess it'll be spooky artwork, maybe. I don't know. You don't know what to expect. And so there's a lot more, I think, freedom to explore that space than something that's been established through kind of a traditional means. And similar, like I think that with like music or something, it's like if you play bluegrass, there's kind of a right and wrong way to do it. And if you just go, I play, country folk Americana, you could start to get into like newgrass or these other hybrid type things. And you feel this kind of freedom that if you put a electric instrument in there, you're not going to get hung for it.
Yeah.
So
how have you evolved? So what was the name of that first game that you created?
That was Kings of Artifice. It was a 2013 release.
And then, so you look at Kings of Artifice, and then you look at, Endless Winter, or some of these more recent titles you've done, which, and for the listeners, I mean, Endless Winter did 767,000 pounds on Kickstarter. It was just a huge, huge success. So congratulations on that, by the way. But when you look at you as a designer, how have you evolved over that time?
Quite a bit. So I think, I played a lot of games. At least I'm not an omni gamer. I'll just get that out of the way. That I don't play a lot of video games. I don't play RPGs. I don't play collectible card games. But I've played a lot of Euro games up to that point, and I felt like I had a pretty confident understanding of kind of what was around in 2012 and what was being done when I was working on that, and that led me to feel maybe hubris or naivety, whatever, I would try out some of this game design stuff. And I think there was a lot of learning. I haven't played Kings of Artifice since it came out. I don't think. It's been a very, very long time. It had a lot of production problems and things like that, so it's kind of a disappointing project. But my next one was a self-published game, and I think at that point I was starting to kind of hedge into working on games, but then also trying to study game design. And I felt it's interesting that it's not very academic at this point still, where you don't go to like some indie college to like study board game design specifically. You study game theory, so video game design, whatever else, but a lot of it's kind of the Wild West. So if you just listen to lots of ludology, you play lots of games, you go to seminars, you pick the brains of you run into Matt Leacock and you go, so how did you do this, how did you do that, you pick his brain and see what comes out of it. And so I think there's kind of just been this like student in me that wants to learn about these things. And then kind of with that same thing, it's like, it's very overwhelming. And you go, should I try to understand how to make a legacy campaign narrative driven choose your own adventure game? It's like, that is so far out of the scope of what I've played and understand that I can just focus myself back in and be like, I love auction games. What if I study every bidding mechanism known to man and deal with that? Or Mancala, like every variant of Mancala that's ever been, recorded. Like studying stuff like that is very fascinating to me because it ties right into my my interests.
That's cool. So if, as kind of paraphrase, you kind of establish what your wheelhouse is and you try to stick to it, essentially, right? when I look at all these titles that you've done, I mean, we've got Coloma, Fistful of Meeples, Sierra West, Lines of Lydia, Merchant's Cove, Endless Winter, Unconscious Mind. From what I've been able to pull off of Kickstarter, they add up to like $2.5 million in funding. I'm sure some of these titles that maybe went straight to retail and maybe didn't hit Kickstarter, I'm sure the number is much larger than that, maybe even 3 million or higher. That's quite a resume to have as a game designer. How have you kind of connected with these different publishers? Like what's brought you? Obviously now your legacy, I think, is probably what's fueling, right, the demand to keep reaching out to you and having you create games for these different publishers. I'm sure it's more them reaching out to you versus the other way around. But how did that start? How did that connection with these different developers, these different publishers, how did that work for you?
It's funny when you like say all the the games like that and the aggregate numbers like that. It's just like the imposter syndrome just comes over me completely. I'm just like, well, it was really hard. So I got that first game published kind of on a whim, and then it went terribly. And I was so embarrassed about it, actually, that I went back to pitching and stuff like that and didn't actually mention that it had been published before, which was kind of a weird thing to like make sell sheets and present yourself effectively as a first-time designer with aspirations. And I got a lot of rejections. Like there was basically from 2013 all the way till 18, I just got a lot of nope, and a lot of prototypes sent back to me, a lot of losing a lot of contests, and just a lot of slaps to the face and a lot of doubt. Just going, why am I doing this? How long can I keep going before something sticks? And I think once one company took a little bit of a risk on me, which was Board and Dice. They signed Sierra West. I met them at Gamma, and Philip is a really fun guy. He was wearing a two-piece suit that had like Pac-Man print all over it. So it's like right away you're just like, that guy's a lot of fun.
That's awesome.
And so they kind of took a risk on that one and put it out. And I think Final Frontier was a little bit more confident signing Coloma because some other publisher had something in the pipeline, right? Like, this guy's not totally whatever. And then they needed a follow-up game for Coloma because they kind of do these like pairings where they have a big game and a small game kind of come out together. And so they said, do you have a smaller game that might go well with this? And I said, well, I happen to have Fistful of Meeples. Yeah. And they say, oh, okay, if the footprint's small enough, we'll throw that on. So I kind of got a twofer on that one. And I helped with development. And then they said, hey, since you're so good at helping with the development on this, would you consider helping out with Merchant's Cove, which is our next title by another designer? Would you want to kind of jump into that pot? And it's a big, ambitious project, this crazy asymmetry. You want to get in on it? I'm like, oh, maybe, okay. And so that rolled into, a very successful Kickstarter. That was their biggest at the time. And then that led, like Fantasia and some of these other companies to reach out and be like, hey, we saw you worked on a handful of games. You got a Seal of Excellence from Dice Tower. Would you consider looking at our new thing? And Fantasia didn't have a game yet. Endless Winter was their first. And so they're kind of trying to find some talent, get some people together. And I looked at it and played it and got back to them and then kind of struck a deal to be the developer, work on the expansions and carry it to the finish line. And that's kind of like that relationship. And that extends into like Unconscious Mind, their next game and their next game. We were all working on all.
So it's almost like you're a combination of like a designer, but you can come in almost like a fixer, I guess, right? If there's something where not necessarily broken, but something they just want to polish, and you can come in and kind of help, work out the kinks and get it polished so that it's kind of commercial ready. Is that fair?
Yeah. So developer is like such a nebulous term because it's a little different like software and stuff. And then in Europe, they tend to call like my job an editor. So you look at like, oh, Great Western Trail, and you'll look down the things that might say editor on there. And that would be like our version of that. And instead of just being like a project manager that's just like seeing it along, it's more like sometimes you have to get out the creative chops, kind of like we were talking about, to actually do some numbers, add something, cut something out, and then stitch it back together without that thing in it.
Yeah.
Correspond with the publisher, make sure that they following their directions, talk with the designer, make sure that they're happy with it and they're on board with that, or bounce things back to them and say, here's what the publisher wants. I articulate that in a certain way. You send that back to me. We work out some kinks, and we hand it back over to publishers so you can get the green light and go to the next stage. So there's a lot of that, and it's kind of like a little Swiss Army knife thing where I think if I had more skills, each of those skills would get used. Like if I was also a graphic designer, I'm sure they would be like, hey, do some graphic design for a Kickstarter page or something, right? And so every developer I know, it's like basically their entire anything they can do gets utilized in some way at some point by a publisher.
Yeah. So let's talk about Solar Sphere. How did you get linked in with this project? And I'm sharing my screen for the people that are watching.
Cool. So Solar Sphere is Duranda Games' second, it's kind of their sophomore game, and it's in the same universe as Solar Storm, which was a cooperative game that they released. It's they kind of this neat thing where they do like a kind of a bigger game experience in a small package as part of what they do. And it's run by two guys in the UK, and they're the designers of it. And Simon is also the developer for Alley Cat Games, and I'm friends with those guys and do some development for them too. So when we were at Essen 2019, the last big one, I met up with him and just shook hands, and just like right away, he's just like, "Oh, you're a cool guy," whatever else, And he circled back and asked if I had stuff to pitch or wanted to work on things, and we just been corresponding for a little bit, and then he showed me. Say, "Hey, would you take a look at this game, this Solar Sphere?" I'm like, "Yeah, why not? Let's check it out." And showed me kind of an early rough prototype on Tabletop Simulator, and I really liked it. I was just like, "This is fun. There's some neat stuff going on in here." And so right away, I was just like, "Yeah, sign me up. I want to work on this. This is great." And they had kind of a little laundry list of things that they wanted to integrate. Like some of the systems were disparate. They say, well, how does this system interact with this system? Can a player just do this the whole time and ignore this? And what about this 3-system thing? How can we make it so these things all tie together with your player board, with what the other players are doing, and fuse things? And so that was like kind of the main focus, was doing that. And then also they asked me to create some expansion content. That's there's that little side box that has a couple of modular expansions that you can add in to kind of raise the complexity level from medium to next click up, like
and that's
that.
A fifth player, I believe, too, right? So it goes from a 1 to 4 player up to, then that adds in the 5th player as well.
Yeah, so as a 5th player, it also adds in it's a little like rondelle sideboard, so you get to cooperative or collectively you get to use the little rondelle by moving these neutral units around to pick up some different things and position stuff. And then there's a little module where instead of just having your normal drones, you get these little droid drones that are more versatile for what they can do. So they go out in the cards and give you some kind of let's say like a backdoor into some things. So if you think like worker placement, sometimes the place gets crowded and it's hard to get in there. These, if you kind of leave them out on the board, allows you to have like backdoor access to these little spots. And so as you're moving them around, you might see a spot that you want to frequent and you think other players are just going to pound on it because they're in front of you in player order or something. You kind of know you got this backdoor into it. And so so that expansion is actually really good at higher player counts. So when it comes with the, say, 5th player expansion, because there's not, say, more worker placement spots on the board, it's going to be more heavily trafficked. And so having that little backdoor in with this little robot expansion really kind of helps push that along.
So this campaign is doing very well. I mean, it's already, I'm going to put this in Canadian dollars because it always sounds bigger, but about 117,000 on a goal of 17,000. So 10x the goal. Still got just under 3 days ago, so 70 hours left, and almost 1,500 backers, which is just incredible. So this is obviously doing very well on Kickstarter, so congratulations on that. Can you talk about kind of the general gist of how to play the game? So is my understanding from this is there's like a Dyson sphere that you're trying to build. Is that fair?
Yeah, so you're trying to basically build the structure and get the energy from the sun, the sun out there like that. And in so doing, you're kind of employed by corporations to go do this task and make it good. And then there's kind of this outside force. It's kind of like an AI force that's interfering with that. So you got to kind of like shoo off the baddies while you're doing that.
Yeah.
And if people are maybe familiar with games like like Lancaster, where you have to there's a little battle going on the side, you got to put some of your knights down there to battle that, or my own game Coloma, where you're doing your thing, but then there's these bandits coming into town. You got to put some guys out in the shootout to kind of get the bandits to go away. It's kind of like that mechanism where there's this little outside pressure, but there's a lot of rewards also to be gained by contributing to that sort of thing. So you want the well-being of the place to be in check, and then you've got that which you're building, which is basically populating all these hexes make up the sun disk. And kind of the third leg of the game is hiring different crew cards, which gives you these kind of once per round special abilities. You can turn the card sideways, it does something for you, so you can kind of build this nice little engine in your tableau. And it's kind of a short game with not a lot of turns, so it's very, very hard to do everything to the maximum. You have to let something kind of go or fit in where somebody else isn't, and see if you can run lean on something, but you can't really ignore everything because it's so important to catch each of these things. There's kind of this nice overall pressure of those three systems going on.
That's cool. And is
And,
that dice placement at its core, I guess?
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the cool mechanisms in there is at the start of your turn, let's say if people are familiar with like Castles of Burgundy or something, where you roll some dice and then you can use each value to perform an action. So in this one, you roll 3 dice and you sum up the dice, and that's going to tell you your player order. So it kind of favors one sum. And then also, if you've rolled a lot of duplicates or a lot of low numbers, you get compensated with this morale track, which kind of goes up. If you roll really high numbers and a lot of unique numbers, it doesn't go up as much. So effectively, if you say roll badly in the game, you get a lot of this other thing that's really, really cool. And if you roll really well and you have these dice, well, you don't really get as much fluff. So
Yeah.
It's kind of a cool way to look at, instead of like, oh, let's just have lots of dice mitigation where, if I roll badly, I'll just spend this stuff to change the values. It's more like, if you roll funky, you end up with this other sort of fluid resource that you can then use this morale to unlock and do a lot of different things with it. So sometimes you're just sitting here going like, I really want a low roll just so I can kind of fill up that tank.
Yeah.
And other times you're like, I got, 2 5s and a 6, let's go to town. Right. So it's kind of a cool little front-loaded mechanism, and you can resolve that all by yourself. At start of turn, everybody rolls, you adjust that stuff, and you kind of see what you've got, and then you go out to the different places that will require different values, odds, evens, and so on and so forth like that.
And then why the decision to do the expansion at the same time as the core game? Like one approach might be to launch a core game, get all the Kickstarter funds on that, and then come back like 8 months later and then do the expansion and then kind of hit the whole audience again. What was the team's kind of thinking behind that, kind of doing them both at the same time?
Well, that's actually been common with majority of the projects I've worked on. And I think it's just something that's going on right now where if we thought about, when I was getting into this stuff, a game would come out, and if it was successful, you might get once a year a new map comes out for it, or like Carcassonne, a new box that has some new tiles and a couple funky meeples and that kind of thing. And so I think it was kind of like, if a game was successful and in print and had a lot of repeat audience, people wanted more from the game and wanted to continue to freshen it up. And so people would they kind of go ahead and do it that way, where then I think things have changed to the point where we don't have a lot of shelf life, especially for Kickstarter games, because sometimes distribution is a little strange. Sometimes these indie games don't end up someplace. And if for instance, the base game sells out, then the expansion comes out, is the base game available then to bring in the expansion? And people are, I think, having a harder time with the heuristic trick, where it's like, if I see a game and it has a bunch of expansions, it used to mean that core game must have been popular and warranted a bunch of expansions because enthusiasm. And I think it's a little harder to tell now whether games are just being front loaded with expansions or not, because they don't have the same sort of shelf life. And I think one way to do it is great. Like, go to Kickstarter and launch your thing. Then some people are going to have missed out on that Kickstarter, come back with an expansion, offer the original game with the expansion, bring in new audience, and then also, sell the expansion to the previous backers and, make a nice bundle. I think it's really cool. It's like when I worked on Glenmore, it was kind of like that. They launched Glenmore 2, and then they came out with Glenmore 2, the Highland Games, and that was allowing people who missed out on the original Glenmore, and then they could get the Highland Games all in one big bundle if they want. And I think it's a good model. I do. Then I see this other one where it's like, you know what? We don't actually know how this is going to go. We have such a big vision for this thing. Wouldn't it be a shame to not have all this, the fifth player, all this other stuff, instead of waiting for people to go, we want a fifth player, and then a year later to actually release it? It's like, let's make it available now, right? So kind of bundle it all in. And then it's like, if people really want more after that, sure, let's make even more stuff and go back to Kickstarter with that after it's proved itself. So I see that kind of as a model. And I think with Kickstarter, the ability for somebody who just wants to like really get behind a campaign, it's hard for them to throw extra money at it besides ordering like duplicate copies. Like, oh man, I really want this thing to launch, get some stretch goals. It's like, and there's one pledge level, it's get the game. It's like, what do I do? Get another game? And so the opportunity to come in and get play mats, to get extra stuff and throw your money at it to really see those stretch goals unlock and all that, I think that helps give that backer more of an active role to push something along, and they get excited about it, right? And I think that builds the general momentum as well.
Yeah. With licensing, some of our listeners are, budding game designers themselves and looking at either A, self-publishing, or B, trying to find a publisher that they can connect with. What's some advice you would give to somebody like that in terms of licensing? What should they expect in terms of licensing their game to a publisher?
Okay, so you're talking about like if they have a prototype
Yeah.
and they sign it to a publisher. Yeah, so there's kind of some different things, different models with that. One thing I would tell you is it's like there's some conventional wisdom. It's like if you get a contract from a publisher, just take it, even if they turn your game upside down, retheme it, whatever else. It's so rare to get published. Just take it, and even if they offer you nothing for it, just take it. And I think that's bad advice. I signed with the first publisher that looked at my game, and it didn't work out very well for me. And later on, seeing how different contracts work, it didn't even have much upward potential. Like what they offered me was just a fixed sum. Like, we will just buy this game from you forever for this amount, and that's that. And so if it blew up on Kickstarter, if it went crazy in retail, I wouldn't see any more than this small sum at that point. And so it's like, I don't think I would license a game under those circumstances. Then famously, like let's say Golden Bell Games or something like that tries to find smaller indie publishers, designers, and offer them a contract that isn't usually as good as the contracts you get through different sources. So if a company like that wants to come out and reach out to you like that, you kind of know that you'd be taking a hit, losing a lot of control of your product with a company that kind of consolidates titles like that, and it wouldn't get the same fair treatment as somebody's like, we want to make this our Gen Con release of next year. This is going to be our flagship. When you hear a publisher wants to get behind your title like that, and then they say, we'll offer you a royalties package, so it's like, you get percent of the Kickstarter, and we want to do expansions for this, and you see upward potential, and you see that they're going to sign their A team behind it. They mention 2 or 3 artists that they would like to get if they could. You hear things like that, you should get excited, because that means that they're into it, and they're not just trying to pick it up cheap and shotgun blast and see if it sticks, sort of thing. So
I guess the challenge there too is if you're established, you have more negotiation power, obviously, right? If you're a new guy coming up, you've never published a game, and you're looking for a publisher to take literally all the risk and put all their funds into building your game, there's going to be some stuff you're going to have to give up. I imagine one is control, right? Mm-hmm. So if they want to make changes, they have the right to make the changes, and you're probably going to sign off on that. You probably want some kind of a royalty deal. So I think that's good advice, is you don't want a flat buyout, because if the thing does become a huge success, you want to be able to get a piece of that ongoing success. I think the challenge becomes is if some designers who are new get too greedy or feel like they have more control than they probably do in the process, there could be missed opportunities as well. And that's kind of the balance, I guess, they got to try to strike, right? I don't know what the answers to that is, quite frankly.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. So they tell you, as a designer generally, don't be afraid to kill your darlings. If you have this is the first mechanic that went into the game, and that's what inspired it. That's the thing that actually gets gutted out of it, and all these tertiary mechanics stay. Yeah, stuff like that happens. So you have to kind of be flexible and see that. And I think pretty early on, you'll be able to get a sense of, ask the publisher, it's like, where is this going to fit in your catalog? What are you going to branch into a new area, and sort of things like that. And you might even ask them, it's like, well, I know you're not going to use like my clip art, and probably not going to use my name of the game. Are you intending to use this theme, or a theme that's adjacent to it? They'll probably answer that during the pitch, or soon thereafter, before you have ink on paper. So I think those are things to ask and think about. And if you really feel uncomfortable with some part of it, like, imagine that they acquire a commercial IP and they say, hey, we really like your worker placement game, and we got Scooby-Doo license that we want to use for it, so it's going to be a Scooby-Doo worker placement game. That could be a really great thing, or not. So you'd have to really decide, is this going to have a commercial IP, or are you just going to incorporate into one of your existing franchises of your universe you've built, or is it going to be something fresh? I don't think there's anything wrong with asking that stuff, and I don't think it's really too presumptuous of a designer to get in there, even a first-time designer, to see those things, because if your first game comes out not good, because maybe bad circumstances, you're actually gonna have a lot harder time ever pitching your second game because of that. And so you need to think about future you as well, that you want to be proud of your first game so you can actually show that as a resume piece instead of like changing your name and not talking about it like somebody I know. So
yeah. I guess part of that too is even if like, do you have one game? Like, do you have one idea you've been working on for a long time, or are you a kind of like a serial designer where you have several ideas and you intend on making multiple different types of games? Those are probably going to give you two different camps too as to how much you want to give up that baby, right? If you know that, well, I'm playing a bit of the longer game here, this title here. For me, maybe I want to make sure my name is on a title that's actually been published, so I have some resume to actually use to help sell my future designs. But if there's only one game and that's your baby, and you only really intend to do that one game, well, then maybe you don't want to give up as much control, and you don't want to change, allow as many changes to that game as so. It's It's just things to think about, I guess, as they go through the process, right? That's the core. So, being a serial designer yourself, what's next on deck? Do you have another game coming, or like what can people expect?
So yeah, there's some stuff in the pipeline that's pretty exciting. So one that's getting a little bit of traction on BGG now through a lot of Andrew Bosley and Vincent Dutray's artwork is Unconscious Mind. So that's a collaborative thing with the Fantasia studio with Yoma, the art director, is also one of the co-designers, and it's 3 Greeks and then me. I'm American, but I'm actually Greek by heritage. So we're working on that, and it's set in kind of a Freudian era Vienna when psychoanalysis and those sorts of techniques were being developed. And so it's got this whole like very like real world Vienna kind of thing, which is illustrated by Vincent Dutray. And then you've got the internal world of the dreams of the patients and these other things. That's Bosley's artwork. And there's some spots where they feather over. And it's kind of an artistically ambitious design. And so that's one that we're working a lot right now. And that's going to be basically once Endless Winter is done with production and hopefully, floating back, all these, logistics are crazy right now. But that is their next title. And that's one that we're really kind of putting like everything into. So that's a lot of fun to look at that. Still kind of following up with a handful of other projects as a developer. Some of them are unannounced. Some of them are announced. So it's, unfortunately, it's like they can't talk about a few of them until they actually have some like BGG pages and stuff like that. It gets chucked out there like that. And then I've got a couple of my own designs. I haven't spent as much time pitching because there hasn't really been conventions, and I've been really busy with these other projects. So I've got a handful of games that are in a good state, should find a nice publisher for. I just haven't been shopping around actually for the last while. So, one of these days I'll kind of dust off some of them, but I did pitch one recently to a publisher I like a lot. And we've kind of negotiated a verbal deal. Like, yeah, let's do this in, first quarter of 2023. So that's about how far out sometimes you have to think. And that's actually soon. That's actually like, yeah, if we do that, that's only a year plus away, where, you start talking about some other projects. It's like, oh yeah, I like this game. Let's, we'll start that in 2 years. It's like such a long arc sometimes.
Well, certainly if anybody wants to follow Solar Sphere, I've put a link in the show notes so they can easily find it just by clicking on that. Or if you go to Kickstarter, just type in Solar Sphere and you'll find this game. As I said, there's about 70 hours left in this campaign. So if you want to get in on the action, looks like an awesome game. Check it out. John, I just want to thank you again for coming on the podcast. I'll be looking for Unconscious Mind and some of these other designs of yours, and I want to wish you all the best in this coming year.
Josh, thank you so much.
You take care.
It's a great show.
Cheers.
Cheers.
This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply join the Facebook group Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.